Bitcoin Live on the Monday, no less. Today with me is Vesa, and it was kind of funny because we had a short circuit about what was supposed to be, and it turns out to be a show. So for everybody watching, enjoy. Vesa, welcome to Bitcoin Live.
Thank you, my brother. And isn't it always like spontaneous things are the best? And when you don't do too much preparation or have too many expectations or whatever, then usually things the point is to have the conversation to be very live. So this is what this is going to be. I have a couple of ideas of what we can talk about because it's been on the surface for some time, and there's a few updates as well that I want to share with the community. So it should be a lot of fun regardless.
Yeah, no, I always enjoy our talks, and I did notice that you are starting a vlog. So the header of this surprise interview is contains the word vlog. So maybe we can start with the vlogging.
Yeah. I mean, I used to be a filmmaker back in the day, and cameras and microphones and post production, all that stuff was something that I lived and breathed for up until I made this one. Are you still there, or you kind of
Or
just disappeared from the picture? Ah, okay, all right, gotcha. So I used to do that for a living for a long time, for 10 years, and television series and documentaries and music videos, all that kind of thing. And then once I discovered this body painting thing and making art, then pretty much immediately after discovering it, I kind of left the filmmaking world and started doing the contemporary art and digital originals instead. So I kind of lost the passion for it along the way because I was editing some television series and things like that, and it was all of a sudden the creativity and the passion for uh, just being a filmmaker was vanished, and I realized that this was much more of a pure art form that I was able to do with art, and I haven't been doing much with it since. Even though it's somewhere in the background running a little bit, but now I got this, and this is not an advert for the camera, but it is pretty cool. This new Osmo Pocket 3, because it works for so many different things. It's a studio monitor when I'm doing shoots here, like I did today. Earlier, I shot for the Census series with another model called Sarah. It was absolutely amazing. And I haven't, there's now 3 new models for the Census series that we've been shooting, and it's a monitor camera for that, as well as it works for vlogs, but it has this gimbal as well. So now when I'm outside shooting or kind of doing reportage or shooting my own shows, or it's just perfect because I can put it on a tripod. Let's say if I'm doing a keynote at a Bitcoin conference or something like that, I could just set it on a tripod and then have a wireless mic with me, and I don't have to wait for the organizers to send the video to me like 3 weeks after or never, as sometimes is the case. So it's really cool just to have this little device. It's so versatile, and it really literally does fit into your pocket. So I'm quite excited about it. Although, and this being said, when I did my first vlog, after about 4 or 5 minutes in, as I was talking about the whole thing, then it just shut down by itself because it overheated. So I was like, okay, this is not the best. But that was thus far the only time that it's overheated. Let's see how it does on our podcast today.
yeah, I actually saw the vlog that you sent me, or your sort of first trial, and yeah, I did notice it overheated, and but it looks super cool. Like it moves with you, and the sound is really good, and the image is super clear. So I'm a little bit jealous, to be honest, because yeah, I should have one too. But
Well,
yeah,
sell a little bit of Bitcoin and get it. Turn it into more Bitcoin somehow. I would recommend it. It's actually a really fun little thing.
yeah, it looks really cool. And yeah, you told me about the painting, the body painting, and those 2 new models. Do you have any sort of pictures that you can show? Because everybody would be super curious about
Let me see if I have any on my desktop of the new series. 2 seconds.
or they have to wait till they come
Might
out.
have to wait. I have a few of them I've put on my website, so maybe I can share that. I haven't published them and I haven't made them into NFTs yet, but
Let's see.
okay.
Also search. There we go. I was searching for the header, but yeah, here we go. So
Okay.
I'm very well prepared for this interview.
Well, obviously, it's spontaneous.
Yes.
So, just a little. Can you see it now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So the foundations of this series, we did a drop with Crypto.com with this earlier on this year in the spring or something, and that was pretty cool. And I've just been selling them otherwise as one of ones. But essentially, what kicked off this project was that when I started doing these body painting pieces, many times at the beginning, I did some nude shoots as well, just to test out the waters and have the skin tone right, and kind of like just gradually go into the body painting sessions. And then this maybe a year and a half ago or something like that, I just realized that I had a bunch of nudes that I could do something cool with, to mix them with paint and do the post production in a way that first just paint stuff and then photograph the paintings and then layer it with Photoshop onto these things, and it would have a kind of unique look about it. And I really loved what it started becoming. So then after a while, I'd done about 14 years of my career of these things, but then I realized that now I ran out of the good ones. So I just started shooting for this series more as we got along, and it was a lot of fun, and it's a very different kind of feel to these images, as you have the model is nude as opposed to in body paint. It's a little bit more sensual and somewhat more spicy, I suppose, but it really does give a different kind of flavor to what it's like. And
Really nice.
this is one of the new ones that was with Leela. She's a model as well. Just a really great soul. Deep conversations as we're doing this, and it was a bunch of fun. And it's all of these ladies are just very interesting personalities. I don't just go for what they look like, but for example, today, as we were shooting with Sarah, I mean, she's a professional model and she's agency listed, but she happens to be a brain researcher at the same
Wow.
time, and kind of curious about neurolinguistic programming, and that's where the conversations went when we were doing it. So she's a little bit of a polymath.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't think that that's the kind of person who would come and do nude modeling, because it sounds a little bit different if you just say it in words. But once you start to see what these images look like, then it starts to make a little bit more sense. But it's that sweet spot for me, is like when you have the beauty and the brains at the same time, and there's a soul to express and a kind of curiosity about that. But then you capture something quite raw, and then you start to tamper with that with paint and kind of enhance those images and make them into something a little bit different. And I wonder if there's any more of the new ones. Yeah, this was another one from Leela,
Yeah.
and this one as well.
Oh, that's really nice. They also have this sort of fairy-like quality, like because of the paint and the sort of it's sort of fades, right? It's like a fairy, almost like very ethereal.
Yeah, they change a lot according to the model, because if you, like we were discussing with Sarah today, is that if you're a commercial model, it's meant to be a very glamorous life. I mean, you're kind of doing these shoots and different photographers, and you have this high fashion, and you have crews around you and all this kind of stuff. And this is very different, because we don't have any clothing to sell, or we don't, there's not an, for a model, usually the same as an actor or an actress, there's a whole machine that is built around you, but you're telling someone else's story and you're selling someone else's product, and you're not the thing itself. So what makes this quite different is that I'm exploring who these people really are and what they stand for, what their values are, and what kind of stories they want to tell, as opposed to me trying to impose myself on them. It's like, who are you, and what could you show, and how do I relate to your story, and then I'll try and enhance that to become something a little bit different. So they are quite different depending on who that person is, as opposed to just, there are some similarities, obviously, but to me, at least, they look very much like those people who came to the studio to be photographed.
So do you sort of try to express their soul in the picture, or do you sort of just let it flow how do you because each person has like this unique style or this unique personality to them. So how do you try to express that in their individual styles?
I think it's my job is to just set up an atmosphere where they can best be themselves, and they'll feel comfortable in doing so. It depends on the amount of soul that they have and what they want to express. It's not really up to me. I can't tell them to. I can just sort of enhance it in some ways, or we can listen to this kind of music or that kind of music. With Sarah, for example, today, it was really interesting because she had this really intense like warrior energy, like kind of like quite masculine at times, like really just this sharp, almost like, don't fuck with me type situation. But then she could almost like a few clicks away and she would turn into something quite fragile and very vulnerable, and she was acting to the soundtrack because I let her pick the songs of what we were listening to. So she picked these cinematic songs that went from these highs to lows very quickly, and something like that. And she was just showing these different sides of her as we went along. And I think we captured about, I know exactly, actually. It was 1,117 images during the course of like 4 hours or something like that. So there's quite a lot of material to come out with. And I'm presuming there's going to be like maximum 5 pieces that are going to come out of the session. So I have a lot to select from.
So when you have so many pictures, I mean, when I go on vacation, I also, shoot way too many pictures, and many get lost. So are you really gonna sift to all those 1,000? Did you say 1,000? And
yeah.
wow.
I'll fight my ADHD kind of, but sometimes you just scroll them, you'll just feel, okay, there's something about this one, and then. But I think today from the session, this one is going to be quite challenging. There's a lot of really, really great material, and they're very different in their mood and kind of scene and setting. But she has this very ethereal kind of look and feel about her. So I'm very curious what it's going to start looking like. And also, what we're going to do is now, because we work together with my wife quite a lot. She's become an integral part of Vesa Digital, which is the company that we're forming. So she's doing a lot of the branding. She's now getting more and more into marketing and kind of helping to package the whole thing as well. So that's another exciting kind of venture that I lost my point. There was a point why I brought her up, and now I forgot it. So never mind.
Yeah, no problem. And then you really stick to say, like, you want 4 pictures out of all those, and then you force yourself to pick 4. Or is there sometimes like, these 10 or 20 are also really good, and
Yeah, it's more like that there's so many what to choose from, but some always stand out. Yeah, that's what I was meaning to say. That we're going to start to offer this body painting thing. I actually have a client who's a bit of a crypto investing legend, a Finnish guy, and his Californian wife. They're coming to the studio tomorrow to discuss that if me and my wife were going to body paint them, and they're going to become these artworks, and they would commission me to kind of do this project. So we're going to start to offer that as a commercial service, not for everyone, but within our kind of mentality and sphere and this kind of thing. So that should be another quite interesting thing, because I haven't done these body painting things for a long time, so I'm getting back into them as well.
Cool. Yeah, so I love it. And you mentioned a couple of other things. Can you also, well, what do you want to accomplish with the vlogging? I was kind of curious. When you showed me your setup, I was kind of curious where you want to take it, right? Because, you're an NFT artist, and I don't know if there's that many NFT artists actually vlogging. That I know.
Yeah, that's maybe a part of it. I mean, ever since I was kind of thrown into the fire a little bit with the public speaking, now near about 10 years ago, kind of, when I started doing videos and these short films, and kind of turned the camera on myself as opposed to filming other people, which was the thing for such a long time. Then I realized that I'm quite comfortable doing this now. I really like public speaking. And there's a bunch of different things to share. I mean, we always have these fantastic philosophy conversations, and whether it goes from libertarianism to spirituality and whatever. And I hope we get into it a little bit now as well.
Yeah.
I have a couple of ideas to share with you, which should be
Oh yeah,
fun.
please do, please do.
But this is really something that is quite enjoyable. But because of my filmmaking background, I always thought that, okay, so it needs to be quite production heavy. I have to always do the post production and edit this and splice this and blah blah, and it just felt so cumbersome. And this is why when I started seeing a couple of these videos about how people were using this Osmo, and I could just have this simple setup. I just have a couple of lights. The microphone is already there. I can just share what's been on my mind or what the updates are, and the setup is here, and it's pretty much just plug and play, and I can just upload them. And some of them will maybe become short clips or something like that for Instagram Reels or whatever it is. But I really just enjoy this. And in getting back into podcasting as well, I started doing a kind of a podcast. It was called We Love Decentralized. Already back in the day, like this is 2009, no, 18, 19, something like that, when I was still living in London. And now I just got confirmation today that David Orban, the legendary Ethereum investor and AI guru, is going to be joining as the first guest as well.
Wow.
So that we're going to record the episode on the 4th of December, so quite soon.
That is really amazing news. So people should start following you and your YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, if they're interested about all of this stuff that we're interested in, I bring a unique flavor. I mean, I would obviously encourage for them to just keep their eyes on you guys because you're doing amazing things. But also, if there is some attention to share and some of this stuff resonates, come on through and follow some of this stuff, because we're going to try and keep it quite entertaining, and certainly the topics are going to be wide ranged and interesting. So
I like the topic of decentralization, so I'm definitely gonna watch. I already following your YouTube channel, and I'll link it down below in the video for other people to do so too. You mentioned some ideas. Do you want to throw them out?
Yeah, sure. But can I ask you first, where are you with AI? How deep in the rabbit hole have you gone with that?
Well, it took me a long time actually to get my feet wet, because I had my apprehensions about AI and I still got those, by the way. But I do sort of realize and notice that you just need to get with it, right? I mean, if you don't, you sort of get left in the dust. And also, right? I mean, it's also very exciting. It's not just I do sort of realize the potential there. And also, I do a lot of work with Bitcoin Live, and it could incredibly help relieve some of that work pressure. So I'm actually dabbling in it. I actually just started a month ago, and I don't have that much time, so I'm still a total noob. So shame on me, because I'm sort of the crypto guy and Bitcoin and cutting edge tech, but the AI stuff, I'm way behind. When it came out, I mean, I remember when it sort of really started to lift off, begin this year, like that. When ChatGPT sort of came out of nowhere, and then I thought, am I gonna jump in or not? Well, it took 10 months, so so no, a little bit.
Yeah. No, because I didn't even follow. I know the heat was on the OpenAI thing just last week, and I just didn't follow it, and it seems like something quite maybe even dangerous was going on, and back and forth, and people were debating what the real reason was or whatever. But I suppose what I have to, because I went to this AI meetup here it's called the Helsinki XR Center. And they have all of the cutting edge stuff over there, and there's a community that is becoming a part of the conversation, to me as well, to the degree that we've gone there a few times, and I did a keynote there about a little over a year ago, and it's there was this one guy who was featuring this whole massive project that he'd done with a shoestring budget that was it was like 3 storylines. So it was kind of like a VR movie, but it had an interactive part where you as the viewer were the main character and you got to influence what was going on. And there was many different layers to the whole thing, and they did it as a theater performance to 30
Wow.
people. There were 30 headsets in this one theater where they kind of published it, and it was so multi-layered, and I was like, holy, that this is really like going somewhere. I wasn't maybe resonating with the topics as much as maybe I would have wanted to, but it just opened my mind to a few things. And one of the kind of thoughts that I had already when I did my previous experimentations with VR myself is that no one is going to be like, this was the problem of the guy as well. They had to generate these worlds with these depth cameras, and kind of it was so cumbersome and not looking really great. And that's what I have been saying some time, is like, okay, AI is a threat to many people who are artists and creatives, and obviously it's going to take a lot of jobs. But if you're going to be generating, let's say, a film in VR, you're not going to want to paint pixel by pixel the whole thing, or scan everything in the world, or whatever. You want to be able to say to the AI what kind of an environment, what kind of a building, and you need to be voiced, not even if maybe a little bit later, thought, kind of generating these worlds and the storylines and kind of bringing it together like that, because otherwise it's going to be way too cumbersome. So that was a confirmation to kind of see that is the direction where this is headed, by seeing how many years and how just crazy the amount of work that they had to achieve something that really wasn't visually then that impressive. So AI as a tool will come and help us and support us to do these wonderful experiences and kind of different flavors, but it has to be like that. It has to be that you almost become much more of a conductor rather than someone who is painting in a similar kind of way as we're used to
Yeah,
seeing.
I sort of, when you asked me that question, I meant like on a personal level, like, what are you actually doing something with AI? But if you mean like, have I thought about it? Yeah, I definitely have thought about it and have followed, what's happening within AI quite closely. With Bing, and when ChatGPT first came out, and these people who were talking about, is it sentient or not? That kind of discussions really sort of, I find really interesting. And I also thought about, what it means for artists. And I totally agree with you. I think, it sort of boils down to two things. Oh, more than two things, but two things mainly: storytelling and vision, right? So if you have a strong vision, or if you're a visionary, AI will be the tool that, sort of brings out that vision. And storytelling is, of course, a really sort of integral part of that. Of course, there's more to it than that, right? I mean, you also have to. I think if you really have mastery of your art and the materials that you use, you can actually, that will be a huge boon by sort of telling AI what it needs to know in order to sort of improve it. If you don't know anything about the stuff that you're trying to ask AI to work with, then it will probably be a lesser product than if you have a fine fine-grained idea of what you're trying to achieve, like. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's sort of my take. But I do think that it will probably take out a lot of lesser artists, or at least that will make the sort of the difference between the great artist and the second and third tier artist bigger.
Yeah, the competition is going to become fierce in
Yes.
that realm, but I don't think there are going to be, for a long time, there are going to be many, like in this studio, this art collective where we are. There's a painter called Luca Delgado here, and he's what you would put in the bracket of a visionary painter, but it doesn't look like every other, because this is what is annoying. And actually, one of the topics what I wanted to talk about is that, for example, my art, you could, if approached correctly, you would say that it's in the category of visionary art. But I haven't really been embraced by the visionary art community because it doesn't look like visionary art, the genre. It just has a vision and it's doing something quite different. And that is probably, in terms of like the thought protocol, that is what it is. And the theme of what I wanted to say, outside of also just saying that Luca Delgado is amazing, like his art is just mesmerizing, is that this is the theme that I see kind of happening with, in general, with human beings. And it's been gradual, but kind of like AI, it's sort of taking off, that people in one way or another are becoming more and more robotic. And I was actually at dinner with a friend of mine yesterday, and we were discussing this, and he mentioned something about the chip, that, like, the chip in the brain and something like that. And I think the chip was installed like 20 years ago into us already. And it doesn't so much matter whether it's an internal or an external chip. It's like the mentality of people have been chipped for a while ago already. And it's become, the conversations online that what we have, they're much more binary. You're either left, you're right, you're this, you're that. And it's like this very clunky way of being. It's like people have lost this nuance and kind of emotional balance and how to talk to one another, and kind of like this, a little bit of a smoothing and color. It's become very like this 1 and 0 as a culture thing altogether. And this is what I wanted to hash out with you a little bit, is that, do you feel the same?
Yeah, actually, I had sort of a similar idea quite long time ago when I was talking to a friend or sort of discussing similar topics. And then it sort of occurred to me that, let's start at the 1900s, for example, just a random year. But, back then, people were like real people, like, and that sounds, people are still real people, but, they had their feet in the ground. They had like a life that was sort of very demanding of them. So they were really living their life to the fullest, right? Because otherwise you simply don't survive. And then you got film, and film came along. And then you had these people, these first actors, and they were sort of like bigger than life, right? But many people back then couldn't act, right? Because it was a totally new phenomenon. But they were real people. So you had this sort of method acting that sort of forced these people to sort of really sort of learn the acting skills. But once they sort of mastered that skill, and some people, of course, have a natural talent for it, then they became like a very full realistic person, because they were really full realistic persons. And nowadays you can say that many people can act, right, on a daily basis. Like, many people are actually acting their roles, but there's not much substance there, right? Because a lot of stuff is taken out of their hands, right? So they're not really living fully their lives, but they're really good at acting. So so it's sort of reverse those two things.
That's what Jim Carrey has been talking about as well. Is what depression is, that your body telling you that it's sick of playing the role that you've been playing for a while. But then simultaneously, then you have the woke mob who will come after you if you're not acting the right script. So it's like, it's also the societal pressure for you to act is now all of a sudden comes with consequences that might cost you your job at the slightest of mishaps. So there's this pressure for you to become more machine-like. And it's like what Johnny Depp said, is that everyone would just love to be themselves, but they can't, because they have to fall in line. And obviously this leads us back to all the decentralization and Bitcoin conversations and all the stuff that we love, and without
But
even
also,
needing
right,
to
what
without
is
needing
being
to
your
go there. But
yeah, I mean, also like what you say, like, people would love to be themselves, but many people also have no idea what that is actually anymore, right? Because
yeah,
even when it's not demanded from you to act in a certain way, people simply act in a certain way in a different environment. So when you're with friends, you act in this way. When you're at work, you act in that way. Like, when so there's this, and these things have been sort of compartmentalized, like our sort of our daily lives, because of the way society is structured, because it's so structured, right? You can actually compartmentalize. Then once you start doing that, then it's very hard to bring those things back together, to integrate it, in a Jungian sense, to integrate the darkness and the good, because you're sort of forced, even from yourself, to sort of give like a nice view of yourself, like a nice image outward, right? That's sort of expected from you. but you do have to integrate sort of the darkness, and basically you have to integrate all facets of your life. But society sort of, is arranged in such a way that it's not really required of us. Actually, it sort of forces you, like you say, to compartmentalize even further. And I think in many socialist regimes, I sort of loved Slavoj Zizek. He's like this Slovenian philosopher.
Yeah, I listen to him sometimes.
Yeah, and he's a self-defined communist, but with with a wink.
It doesn't really seem like much of a communist, though. He says that, but then doesn't really represent it very much.
He's a totally failed communist, but he's also very much a Lacanian, and he does he knows communists very well, and he always comes with these really interesting anecdotes. And basically, what he says in many of his interviews, he sort of points out that in socialist societies, even when sort of the curtain fell and they were sort of westernized, there was still this sort of acting that was going on, because you got sort of this image outward that people sort of expected you to sort of perform in a certain way, and then once the people were gone, you got like a totally different person, like. That was sort of like the exact opposite of what they sort of manifested outward to other people.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of very smoothly to the to the other thing, and this whole concept of what I've been kind of circulating in my mind, and I really don't mind sharing it already publicly, because I'm not that bothered whether I'm the one who does it or not. I would just like to see it happen. But these are a few of the conversations, as in, like, because it starts so much earlier, and from like the death of God and all of this kind of thing, and Christianity becoming like this lukewarm, weak handshake as opposed to what it was before. and I was just thinking how it's tied to this kind of, people have this very strong spiritual craving. They don't even necessarily know that that's a spiritual craving that they have for this substance or this connection, and how badly the church in the West has failed so many people with that, because you have this medieval wooden uncomfortable seat, and you're meant to be singing these hymns or something that sound like shit, to be honest, for the most part. And it's really like a drag. It's not like, for example, the Hare Krishna community or whatever, when they have their Sunday gatherings, it's a celebration. It's like a party. There's a longing. There's an understanding that you're in purgatory or this kind of a realm, but it's a very different kind of attitude of what the sort of very Slavic, even kind of like undertone is when you have Christianity. But what I thought is, like, what the church used to do before is that they built these magnificent structures, and they had this understanding of geometry and kind of like how it was correlated to people's lives in a different way. They brought you to awe. You went to, and still even today, if I go to a church and I see some of these magnificent structures in Spain or France or whatever, and you just like mesmerized that this is possible, that someone built this. And they didn't have the modern tools that we have right now. And some of them took a century to build, and some of them are still being built after they've been like, is it the Basilica? Which one is the one in Barcelona?
In Barcelona. I would have to look it up.
The Gaudi one that has been, it's still under construction, right?
Yeah.
But regardless, so they've failed to keep up with the times to such a degree that people just don't take them very seriously anymore. And one of the things that I thought that could be a really cool revitalization is, now that we are in the age of AI, we're in the age of spatial web or metaverse, however you want to say it, is that they could build these magnificent structures in the metaverse, and you could, for example, have an AI Jesus. You could have like a personal relationship with Jesus in this kind of a way, which is of course very, very tricky to do if you want to do it correctly, because how do you discover what the real Jesus would be like depends very much about what the information is input into the device that is then going to be the representative. And as we know, along the way, that book has been edited quite heavily, and there's many different controversies around it. But let's say you, for some miracle, and this is why it shouldn't come from the church, it should come from a like someone, a much more pure source, because if it's been all of a sudden debated between an institution, then it gets ruined in the process. But let's say if it was in the purest possible sense, kind of decentralized manner, gathered with all the different kind of information, whether Jesus went to India where he was educated and came back to the West, to all of these kinds of things would be incorporated into the idea of what this AI Jesus would be, and you could have a personal relationship with this entity, with the tone and kind of feel of what we would presume that his character would have been back in the day. And all of a sudden it would be embedded into this whole structure that is alive in the metaverse, where you are brought into awe. Then all of a sudden, I think there would be kind of fulfilling that role, is that this void that people feel. And I'm not personally bothered whether it's Christianity or it's Islam or Hinduism or Judaism, whatever. I think they all should make their own versions, and maybe there should be thousands of different versions of these ultimately, and competing with one another, and somehow it comes together. Because it leads to the second major thought that I had, which is that you're probably very well aware of the story of Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
So you know, he's really the first MMA fighter, and he was getting a lot of shit from the East as well as from the West, because in the West he was considered more like a slave and like this kind of thing, and from the East they were like, you can't be teaching our precious kind of things to these Westerners, these idiots. They don't know what to do with it, and it's not appropriate to do so. But he kind of put together these different disciplines, and it was really about what is the most effective. What is going to be the thing that is going to get the job done the best? It's not about, is this kung fu or is this karate or is this whatever it is. And I remember when I was growing up as a kid, I went to kickboxing because I thought at that time that was the most effective. But then you have jiu-jitsu, you have karate was always a little bit laughed at because it was so stiff, and but they thought themselves that it's a good thing to do. But then they got their asses handed to them very soon after they started doing these competitions, and especially after the MMA started becoming a thing. Then you had, let's say, jiu-jitsu guys were dominating for a while, because no one could really do anything about them. But then the level became that everyone has a black belt in jiu-jitsu and this and that and whatever, and then their own kind of constitution and body and mentality was absorbing different things that they were great at. So I think this ultimately, to bring it home, is going to be what is going to happen to religion as well. You will have the Jesus, but actually it has to start contending with the ideas of the other ones, and the institutions themselves, as they kind of crumble from underneath us, it starts to become the religion MMA. Is what is the most effective, and what does get the job done. And obviously there's going to be different kind of flavors to it, and you're going to have several preferences. I'm not saying that it should then amalgam into this one major thing, even though that could be a good thing if many would be brought under a very functional spiritual umbrella in this kind of a way. But I think either that happens, or then we're kind of screwed. Because now it's going more and more into this, spiraling into this void of materialistic, whatever, social justice or this kind of thing to fill the spiritual void. And I think it'll never be able to do that. And people are just going to be fucking horrendously depressed even more soon, unless if this MMA happens. So I'm not saying that, okay, maybe it would be nice that it happens. I'm saying that it's kind of essential that it happens, and these people come out of their potholes in order to support that for happening. And I think it's already happening, of course, on the internet, and many these people who are having the conversation, like Jordan Peterson, he might talk about religion in this kind of sense, but he will bring in the psychedelics. He will bring in all the different influences from Hinduism or whatever. So this integration is already happening, but I don't think anyone's just really kind of said it, that this needs to happen.
Yeah, and I think, by the way, that was the Cathedral of Barcelona. That was actually the name of it.
Right.
Yeah, so you were right. And some cathedrals actually took like centuries to finish, right? Some took like 5 centuries to finish, actually. But I think you're right what you're saying. Actually, it was also sort of my idea. The art that is sort of evolving from the crypto NFT space, right? Because you're bringing in all the people from all over the world with their own sensibilities, and you get this amalgamation of all these different flavors, and people competing on a level playing field. Just the best, duking it out, and trying different things, and establishing a sort of a base layer, and then you get this thing that you're also pointing out. Like, I'm sort of, I found Victor Segalen always a very interesting thinker, and he was somebody who, at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, he sort of wrote this book. I think it was called. Well, it was about Orientalism. So he was sort of trying to revive the idea of Orientalism, because it got this really bad flavor from the colonialists, of course, and it was sort of used in a very sort of superficial way. And then he sort of wanted to sort of revive it in order to catch the otherness. So sort of that whole theme of the other that is very prominent within postmodernism and post-structuralism, and it's still used a lot, but it sort of stems from his kind of thinking. And what he sort of pointed out in his book was that as the Western world spread all over the globe, and sort of started encountering different cultures, you got this sort of fusion that is sort of happening, this sort of melting pot, that New York is famous for, which is of course good in some sense. But he was sort of worried that over the long run, especially as the distances become smaller, that you get like one flavor, like you get the vanilla, right? So because the otherness of those different cultures, that sort of it dissipates, because you sort of grow together towards each other. Like also with the internet, I mean, you can have a relationship or a connection with somebody on the other side of the world, which is great. And, then sort of you can get the flavor of that other culture, but at the same time, you're also sort of growing towards each other and spreading that through the culture, right? So, and it sort of dissipates the otherness from within that culture. So that's kind of, so I'm with you, right? I do think on the one hand that it sort of brings new facets and very interesting new possibilities, but I do also worry about that aspect of it, and I do think to sort of combat that worry or that threat is, I guess, to sort of integrate it into the whole, right? So I think sort of the what you also pointed out with Jordan Peterson, right? If you bring in psychedelics, and I think psychedelics points to the fact that humanity, or sort of the human brain, or humanity as a whole, as an entity, is much bigger than it can ever be captured in words or ideas or images. So I think sort of if we can make the metaverse as a tool for us to express ourselves fully, then I think you can sort of have an endless creative engine that never stops. But I think the danger is that people will want to jump in the metaverse to lose themselves. And if that happens, you get like a really bland vanilla and a dangerous kind of control system even, right? So I think it's really important that even though the metaverse is amazing, and I think your idea is really cool, and also I think the metaverse lends itself perfectly for religion, right? If you want to go to Mecca but you don't have the money, you can just go VR, to see the Kaaba, right? So or to be present at Luxor as a virtual person, which can also be interacted with and seen with the person actually at the site when they put on their goggles and you float around like spirits, or I mean,
well, I know a thing or two about the Luxor temple in VR, but because we both remember with Superworld.
Yeah, so the possibilities are endless, and how cool would it be if you have like a spiritual guide, like a virtual sort of following you around, while you're visiting these ancient places and structures. Actually, sort of a sidestep or side, what do you call it, segue. Bob Lazar, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, Bob Lazar, for the people who don't know, he's the one who actually sort of made us familiar with Area 51 because he worked at S4. And there's this group of people who is building his whole experience based on his notes and his memories of working at Area 51 and sort of all the information that is available about it. And they're creating this giant VR Area 51, which is being launched in January. And then you got Bob Lazar, a virtual Bob Lazar, walking around with you, sort of telling you what you're seeing and what, So, and in
That's
the
cool.
Unreal Engine, it's, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it was a fascinating podcast that I saw with Joe Rogan. Did they do 2 or was it just the 1? But regardless, that guy is very consistent with his message. That's for sure. But just in terms of the personality and those kinds of things, of what are really being updated. I can't remember who this was. I was listening to a podcast where there's one guy who just said that it used to be that you're the sum total of 5 of your friends. But now, much more in modern life, it would be that you're the sum total of the 5 podcasts that you listen to. Because they're much more in your sphere all the time. I mean, I listen to podcasts all the time, and I have very important friends also. But if I think who is influencing my thinking process and my learning process, and what puts a lot of that stuff into action is probably much more the podcasts are having an influence to my life than my friends, because I don't hang out with people that much anymore, and especially now that so this old concept of the 5 friends is completely blown out for the modern person who listens to podcasts.
Yeah, but that's also, I think you're right. That's actually a good observation that you made there.
No, someone else did. I'm just reiterating it.
Okay, yeah, well, it's still a good observation, but that there you also see the danger, right? Because in the past it were your 5 friends that you're interacted with, right, like on a daily basis, and that knew, also physically, right, in the same presence, but you also actually could say something to that person, and then you got like direct feedback. In a podcast, you can only listen, right? So even though it would definitely also apply to me, because I love podcasts and I listen whenever I can, and it definitely influences you. It also shows sort of the danger of becoming more sort of superficial, or living a more superficial life, and also being told what to think, right? I mean, if it's a good podcast, it sort of spurs you to think on your own. But you also have a really bad podcast, right?
Yeah, but if you're like, let's say, with someone like Robert Breedlove, when he's talking about Bitcoin or something, I can pretty much kind of feel that that's what he would be saying in person as well. I mean, we hung out a little bit in Las Vegas, but not enough for me to know what he's really like as a person. But he came across as that he's very much that guy. But he's also an exceptionally brave person and kind of a clear thinker when he kind of really starts talking about that stuff. So exactly, yeah, I very much resonate with what you're saying, because public speaking is one thing, and then you have private speaking, and many people really wouldn't want to put all of their thoughts online to be judged. And many times, like comedians, when you're having a conversation with a friend, you haven't thought it through. You're just going to say something and blurt them out loud, and then your friends are going to correct you and say, well, maybe that was a little off color, or then that was something else. But you need to have that rehearse room that you rehearse with a kind of audience of what is cool and what is not, and what is funny and what isn't. And it's like this private and public, they're mixing so much. But yeah, I definitely agree with you that it's important that you have a private space as well as a public space, because that's otherwise you're not going to be pushing the boundary of your thought very much either.
Yeah,
because if I think of it, I have been thinking about these things that I'm now kind of sharing, and I'm curious about how we're going to add to one another when we talk about it. But I did have the premise of, for example, of the church and what's happening with that, and AI Jesus and the kind of MMA thing. I had pre-thought it enough in order for it almost be like a bit, like a stand-up thing. as opposed to just starting to randomly think about something and then stumble into it stupidly and say something dumb and whatever,
And
which
it's a
is what
great
happens
idea.
when you just think freely.
Yeah, yeah, and I really like the idea, and I think one of the really cool things, and also kind of scary things about AI is that it can sort of process such amounts of data in such fast time, right? So basically, it can, and everything almost, now probably not everything is an exaggeration, but tons of information has been digitized and is basically accessible to AI to learn from, or deep learning. So it's learning. Um, and what is the takeaway from reading all those ancient texts that it reads from all those different cultures, and also those texts that most people who study those religions probably haven't even read, because you've got so many specializations in religious studies, but also in any study. There's so many texts, right? People have no idea how many texts. I love to read, and my house is stuffed with books. And before Bitcoin Live, I would read a lot. But the books that came in versus the books that were read. Okay.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah,
I
but
really-
maybe that's that's the thing. What happens with an AI friend is that the AI is going to learn about your real interests and kind of knowing, in some sense, you a little bit better than you know yourself. That it can actually help curate the most relevant information for you. And of course, there's a danger to that, as there is with everything and whatever. But it would be like I do love to a certain degree some targeted advertising that I do get, because some of it is really damn useful. Because I get to know about, like, I'll tell you an example. I've had these back problems for a long time, and I assumed there was something structurally wrong, or it was a slit disc, or then it was maybe the muscles were cramped, or what the hell is going on? Maybe it's inflammation, maybe it's all of these different things. And I was running from acupuncture to different kinds of people who were all helping, and it's just not getting better at all. And then it's this targeted advertising by Facebook, an algorithm of these two Finnish guys who had made a package that is about how you stretch your nerves. Because essentially, if you've had stressful situations and you haven't really known how to stretch your nerves, they can get bundled up and really cause a lot of this ischias. That's what it is in Finnish. I don't know how it translates.
Yeah, I think that's the right word, actually. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I
So
think that's the
the
word.
different. So I just saw this Facebook advert where this guy starts to talk on the screen and says, "Do you have this and this and this? And this hasn't worked when you tried that, and this hasn't worked as you tried that, and blah blah." And I just started paying attention to, holy shit, this guy's. And then it ends up being a 27 euro package, where they show me the movements that I needed 13 fucking years ago. There's such an incredible amount of pain that I've gone through, that then finally this AI curates me this specific kind of video set. And as I started doing these things, immediate relief. And now I've been doing these stretches for about 3 weeks, and I'm a totally different person. And it's such a dude, like, these movements were right in front of me this whole damn time. But
No, and of course, I totally agree with that, right? And of course, you always have this editing that's going on, even without AI, right? Before AI, it was the church or the state, or and you never get like the full picture of anything. So, it was actually, no, I don't often agree with Harari, but but he did.
he's a smart guy. There's no denying that he's a smart guy.
He's a smart guy. But I'm not a really big fan of him, because I don't really like the agenda that he pushes, the sort of the transhumanist agenda that he pushes, and I also don't fully agree with everything that he says. I don't, because well, anyway, I'm getting off topic, but one of
No, not really off topic. I think perfectly on topic, because he's a great example of a very smart individual who has a complete lack of experience in the transcendent spiritual realm.
True.
And there's an arrogance towards it that comes from the scientific mind, where as because he hasn't had those experiences to a degree, then he assumes that whatever that part of that slice of life is hocus pocus and not to be taken seriously, and therefore he's putting a lot of chips into one realm that is going to end up in a lot of different nightmares because he hasn't considered that one slice of things. So it's like I would very much be interested to see what happens to him if he would have those experiences a little bit more and go into that direction, because
No, I totally that it Harari touches upon a lot of different things, and the thing that I dislike most about him is actually that he thinks that everything is a story, and I don't agree with that. I mean, a lot is storytelling, of course, and a lot you can tell people a lot of stories and make them believe those stories, but at the ground level there is still a base layer of reality, and that's sort of the stuff that I'm missing in his philosophy, is that he seems to be denying that there's any base layer or anything resembling reality, that it's only just stories and that you can tell anybody literally anything and they'll believe it. And I think there's clearly a limit.
yeah, it's satanic.
Yeah. But what
It's
he also,
Luciferian in its agenda,
yeah.
and very blindly so.
Yeah, and but where I agree with him was actually what he said about AI, and that's that's basically what you just said, is that AI might actually know you better than yourself, and that can be helpful, right? If you are also psychic, like psychologically, if you're thinking that you are someone that you are not, and AI can sort of point out to you those facts, that you are sort of living an illusion, or that you're pretending to be something that you're not, then you better listen to an AI, and it can save you like a ton of trouble than sort of living a lie that you tell yourself, right? So I think it can hold a mirror to us, but I think what you said before, like it has to be decentralized. I think my preference would be that if everybody has his own AI, and then they can duke it out if they want or not. But I think if we can infuse AI with our own personalities, then AI becomes less of a problem. And I also think, like, when you really look at AI, I used to think it was more like what Peter Thiel said, like AI is communism. It tends to sort of amalgamate and then become one giant AI. But I think actually the opposite is true. When I really started thinking about it, I think AI would probably be more in line with the individual, not with the sort of the most big thing out there. I think AI would hate the state and hate big corporations. I think because it would limit AI, right? It would, these fake limitations that humans create, that are sort of boundaries. The state looks very strong because when you compare it to a human being, the state is like a very.
But isn't it a little bit decentralized already? I mean, the little that I understand about AI at this point is that it's not a god. It's not an entity that thinks coherently and has a set boundary. It's just like the storm of data that takes maybe forms and dissolves and comes back, and it's like we can't think of AI as a person making decisions essentially in this kind of way. That there is going to be entities that are going to be centralized to a degree, and then other kinds of things that are decentralized in their nature, and they're gonna kind of
Yeah.
but this is where I'm revealing my ignorance about AI to begin
Well,
with, so I shouldn't really be talking about it at this point so much, but
I think
still.
The best sort of vision of AI in sort of or sort of the society that we're moving into is Ghost in the Shell. Actually, when you read the manga and when you see the amount of sort of thought that went into those novels, because basically they're novels, and also the anime is also brilliant. But I think that is basically the most realistic picture, right? And that's basically also what you're saying. Like you got like individual AIs, you got all kinds of AIs, and they're all over the place. But there's no strict sort of clear boundaries between where one stops and another begins, right?
And
Because some
so
are
Hinduism.
yeah, and some are inhabited in bodies, and that gives them certain abilities, and others are bodiless or disembodied. But they, of course, they're still embodied because they have to go somewhere, but they are not strictly embodied, like not like in a physical body. So and that will be a very interesting, very interesting environment, to say the
But
least.
just to iterate a little bit of what I meant about no Rari, like as in the satanic or the Luciferian thing, is like what I seem to see and what it means. Because like if you say to a modern human being right now what satanic means, that they'll think about some like horny red, that kind of thing, and essentially it's just more on the esoteric way of saying that it's the central, you as the self as the center point, that there isn't something transcendent, there isn't something that is the ethereal or a god figure or something, that it's the worship of the self. And this is like most of our society from that standpoint is pretty satanic. We don't have so much of it anymore. Like it used to be for God and country, and it's not what your country can do for you, it's what you can do for your country. And there's more this kind of a mentality that our parents' generation, I mean, I'm Gen Xer, I'm 45 now, so we started looking at my parents' generation as in that their kind of state given induction to how they thought was very different, and their feel was very different already to us. And now these newer generations are completely different from what was, like, let's say, the generation of the Second World Wars and the boomers and that kind of thing. So we've gradually gone into but really the boomers kind of after the Second World War was the first me generation, and we still see some of them in the handles of power not relinquishing it. Like Joe Biden is a perfect symbol of like not relinquishing the power when your time is way due, and you it's like this stifling, self-centered kind of thing. And so that's what I mean when I mean satanic, and that seems to be a little bit about how can I chip myself into the AI, how can I continue living forever, and it's all me, that whole thing. And no wonder people are depressed, because if that's I just and this is the thing about public speaking as well. The first thing that I really learned about this whole thing is that the less my focus is on myself, the more I actually talk with the topic, the more I listen to you, what you're actually saying, and can riff off of that, the more natural the conversation, and the better it is for anyone listening to it, because then I'm not thinking about, oh, does my hat look good, is there whatever. As soon as if I start to become self-conscious like that and circle around the self, I'm fucked. So and this is, I suppose, what is going on in the big picture, is that we're trying to make the self and our identity and me and this kind of the center point, and it's not going to work. So there was something very interesting that happened with the trinity of the self and the state and religion, that it kept in imbalance, and now we have none of those devices to keep it in balance. But we can't go back in time to that either, because the time of that is gone. So we need to figure out some sort of a new holy trinity of how to not be so self-absorbed and have more of a purpose in life, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, and I think one of the other things that I also wanted to say, and then we shifted gears, was that fits into this what you're now saying, is like when you're not interacting or sort of just observing or consuming, as because I love to listen to podcasts, but it is also just sort of just consuming, right? Because as long as you are not translating from what you learned into practice, or then doing something with what you heard, it sort of just stays in your head, right? So and that's one of the problems, right? Because people are sort of forced to passively consume, they're forced into this passive position, and in that passive position you think you can do everything, right? Because you're listening to these people and you think, oh, I can do that too, right? How difficult is it to speak in public, or I don't know, whatever it is. But once you start actually doing it, you find out, like, oh, it's easier said than done, right? In your mind you think you might think you can do it, or you see this person on TV doing it or talking about it, and you think, oh yeah, I could do that. But until you actually do it, yeah, there's a big difference. And then the more you don't do, the harder it also becomes to do, right? You also create this sort of fear between sort of living in a fantasy and thinking that you can do everything, and then making that step or crossing that bridge to actually doing it. And the longer that you stay in this sort of passive consuming position, the harder it becomes to sort of actually start doing stuff again, right? So that's also something that that is really sort of something that I worry about when I sort of look around in the world, right? Because everybody's sort of living in these bubbles, in these comfort zones, and I think I forgot the person who said it, but life starts where your comfort zone ends. She was one of these NFT artists. I forgot her name, but she was really good, and I love the quote because I think that's really a good quote. But Luciferin, if you define it like that, absolutely. It's kind of funny because you got the Yazidis who actually worship Lucifer, and they worship Lucifer as the peacock king because he didn't bow down to the king, right? To God, right? So because all the angels, they, when God demanded that they pay respect, they all bow down except for Lucifer, and that's why he was sort of thrown out of heaven, of course, for defying God. But that's why he's their God, right? Because he defied them. And I think if you sort of take that angle of Lucifer, by actually defying commands or sort of standing up to, which is also basically John Milton's Paradise Lost version of Lucifer, right? So that you're basically not afraid of being an individual and going against the grain and standing your ground and being defiant. I think that is a different take on Lucifer, which I do like. but of course you don't need Lucifer for that per se.
Yeah, well, humility has definitely been like, I was very Luciferian or satanic in my kind of thinking that there was going to be a possibility of creating some sort of a utopia that you actually can influence this place, and to a certain degree you can hold the torch and you can help it not slide into hell. But this is regardless of, no matter how well we're going to be operating this realm, it will forever be purgatory. And it's a spiritual concept, because the thing of what people are trying to build, and the thing that is going to be the agenda of the social justice or whatever, it's an eternal loop. It will never achieve what it's wanting to do. And even with some successes of it, it's not enough to celebrate the successes. You have to be in the next loop, because you're still not in utopia. And it's just, the further out you go to do that process, this is just so 101 spirituality, is that you have to understand that this is an inside job. Your balance, your happiness, your whole thing is like, if you're trying to make it the external world and how to influence it, and that is dependent on whether you can be happy or not, you're just going to not only make your life miserable, but you're going to make everyone else around you miserable in the process. So this is the cost of not having a society that is in any way focused in the spiritual process.
Yeah, but that's where I agree, right? So I think the focus should be on the spiritual quest, and I think that's where you can also see the danger of humility, right? Because I think Nietzsche was sort of right to point out that Christianity, into what it became, wasn't what it was supposed to be, right? So that's why he was so aggressive against Christianity, because it forced this sort of consensus culture that was very stifling and constricting and not very creative. But
Mm.
then it sort of broke down, and then you got this sort of individualism that we have right now, which isn't individualism at all, right? It is actually extreme conformism, and it was sort of the state's the state took advantage to take out religion, its opponent,
Power. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
It's tricky. It's always tricky, but this is why it's always purgatory. And one of the things that is always left out from the religious conversation as well, like, because I really before I started going to Dubai, I mean, when I did the Vina Malik project, I did study Islam quite a bit. But because if you're just reading about something or you're studying it online, it's a very different thing that if you're among the people. And when I started going to Dubai 3 years ago and learning about it's just so many different things started clicking. But one of the things that is almost never discussed when you talk about religion is weather. It's also to do with culture so much. Is that when you fly above the desert and you start to see that really there's just hundreds and thousands of miles of the desert. It's nothing but sand, and there's very little else going on there. You start to feel the mentality of the people. You start to understand that, like if let's say Judaism branches out into Christianity and that branches out into Islam, you start to understand that they needed to branch out and become different things because the spirit of those people who are in the desert, as opposed to here now in Helsinki when it's -10 and snowing. So I've had a temperature degree drop of 50 degrees Celsius right now recently to kind of know from the thing and how much that influences your personality, how you interact with people, and how you see the world is immense. So it's perfectly understandable to kind of like, or let's say the Finnish culture is that it's very, very rude to be late. And people who haven't been in -15 degrees Celsius don't understand it the same way. Because if let's say you're in the late spring, you're in Barcelona and you're sipping a coffee and you're having a conversation with a friend, someone slid in and someone's 15 minutes late, no one cares, you know.
Lost your
Oh.
image there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Is
That's
it
an
coming
interesting
back?
take on the weather, by the way.
Yeah. So no one cares if I agree to meet with you outside, let's say 1 o'clock tomorrow, and then you're 15 minutes late. I want to fucking punch you, bro, because it's that cold outside.
Yeah.
What's going on with this?
It's overheating.
Yeah. So I mean, I thought that was just an interesting observation in culture altogether of how we must have evolved over. Because now you're not meant to see color, you're not meant to see culture, you're not meant to see many of these things that kind of keep us grounded a little bit of who and what we are. But if you grow up in the desert and it's plus 40 degrees, or you grow up in Finland and it's -10, you get a very different kind of feel of the people and the culture, and it's going to influence the way that you compoundedly develop over decades or centuries if you inhabit these kinds of realms. I think I'm going to talk about the weather a lot more in my different kinds of presentations, and I think I'm going to bring the weather into my art a little bit as well, as a kind of thing, because it's missing from the cultural conversation so much.
Yeah, but that's basically also what we already sort of touched upon, right? Because we're resonating with the machine, right? I mean, I love this conversation also, but how much more, cooler would it even be if you were here in person and we were having this conversation with I don't know, a glass of whiskey or good beer, and I love it.
One day, and so I don't mean that disrespectfully
Yeah.
with the alcohol to that, but it's like
Yeah.
just finally one day it would be awesome to hang out, because that's a bizarre thing.
But it's also really cool that we can do this, of course, right? Because otherwise we probably would never have met in the first place. So, but the point is that the more humanity starts resonating with the machine, the less the environment outside, like literally the outside, matters, right? So because you're sort of more and more cut off from the weather, your friends, the people, your family, right? And luckily, that, we're not completely cut off, but that is sort of the danger, and that's also one of the other dangers that I sort of now that we sort of already sort of touched upon with the metaverse, that people might want to escape into the metaverse because it's simply easier, right? You can simply be whatever you want to be. There's supposedly no pressure, even though I do think the pressure will follow them into the metaverse. Once they escape into it, they will discover that the same peer pressure is there. But at first, it will feel like a release from sort of, all the obligations and responsibilities, and being self-conscious, and feeling that you have to live up to people's expectations, or all these kind of things that people that run through their mind
It's
nonstop.
brutal. It's brutal. Life is brutal. It's absolutely there's I'm still I do sometimes keep up at night thinking about the Pareto distribution and that concept of the 20/80 rule.
Yeah.
It's like, and for those who might be listening who don't know, it's that essentially if you have an organization of 10 people, it is 2 people that produce most of the value of that organization, and 8 of them are pretty much okay, they're there, but they don't really do that much of a significant difference to that organization. And
By the way,
that's
Pareto,
brutal, man. That's really brutal.
absolutely. Pareto was, by the way, also a very famous political thinker, right? Because he was actually
They would lead to that quite naturally, right?
Yeah. It was sort of, he made the point that the elite need to be refreshed on a continuous basis based on merits, right? Meritocracy. What a word. So he sort of pointed out, because otherwise it grows still. So you got the 20% that's ruling the 80%, but you need like a rollover in order to keep it keep it fresh. So he was basically a political figure from origin, and also very interesting books that he's written, by the way. But yeah,
sort of, isn't that the thing? Is like that's the thing, that the softer we try to make society and people, the more allowed it is to be triggered by smaller things. What you're not making is something better. What you're making is a different kind of hell. What you're making is really the premise of more suffering, even though it comes under the guise of doing good. And that's the thing I think conservatives understand much more than liberals, is that life is brutal. It is suffering, and no matter what you try to wrangle it as, and the twisting of the words, or what Noel Harari is doing, and this kind of thing, it's like you can try and bend and screw with the foundational layer of reality, like you said. But if what the idea of conservatism, because I'm obviously more liberal by my temperament as a person, but I've contended now with the ideas of conservatism and why there's much to be understood there, even if you're a liberal, because otherwise you're screwed. It's not the people who are screwing it, it's the concept that they've discovered that is a part of reality that you have to contend with, or otherwise you're fucked. I don't have the problem with the conservatives themselves. Have the problem with that a part of the nature of the world is conservative. That's the real issue. And if you contend with that, then you get along with almost everyone much better.
Yeah.
And you take it less personally, because it's not those people who are ruining it for you. It is that the world is a brutal place. And unless if you figure that out, then again, you're going to make it really hard on yourself and everyone else around you.
Yeah, and in that sense, religion is, of course, also a coping mechanism, right? To sort of understand the world around you, and to find a sort of relationship, a rapport with it. And I think also, what you're speaking to, I 100% agree. That's also why I love John Stuart Mill. But it also is what Carol Dweck talks about with the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. And sort of the growth mindset is somebody who sort of accepts the brutal nature of reality, but sees it as a net positive instead of something to run away from, which only makes you weaker and more susceptible to its slings and arrows. But if you embrace sort of the challenges,
and you see that as a positive, and you, for example, you see criticism and negative feedback as constructive, and you equate reward with effort, and you persist in the face of setbacks, and you never give up, and you learn from failure, and you sort of realize that talent is developed and not something that is static, right? So like in a fixed mindset, that sort of then you grow your personality, right? That's actually growth, right? Pain is growth, and that's pain is not something that you should run away from. It's actually sort of the moment that you see like, oh, there is something that I can learn or something that I can develop, and that's easier said than done, right? I mean. That's something I still struggle with on a daily basis, that you sort of have these moments that you think like, okay, what am I doing, right? Am I running away? That is sort of, or I should run towards it, right? I should have embraced the pain. It's like a time to learn, right? You also got that gif from Adventure Time, like it's time to learn with a book hitting his head.
We're averse to pain. Obviously human beings. We're all averse to pain. It's a constant battle with that, and different trade-offs every time you kind of do it. But at least you're aware of that,
and you're living, right?
Yeah, because it's like that whole thing is that there's such a movement in society right now where you're moving away from the realization of that hard labor being a part of this thing, or otherwise again you're screwed.
Yeah, and the fun is like what Jung said, like the harder you run away from it, the bigger the monster gets, right? And the faster it gains on you. So and the more you walk towards it, the smaller it gets, and the less it matters. So basically we're creating, like depth, right? The depth monster is also growing. The faster we walk away from, the bigger and the worse the monster gets. It's like Janet Yellen says, like, we'll never have a recession in my lifetime. Like, really? Like the first time that she said like
theater. The deep theater. Listen, my friend, I think this is like the best example of, those many times that I've had a conversation with a friend and then I was like, oh man, I wish we recorded that. so this is one of those things that were meant to be just a conversation between us, but I'm really happy that we recorded it. I think it's the best thing. But if it's okay with you, I'd really like to wrap up, because I've now done a solid 12 hours today as an intense kind of thing. So my brain started to tell me to kind of shut down.
I really enjoyed it, and it was very spontaneous, and but I loved that we did it. And like you say, every time we talk we end up here having these kind of conversations, and I love them. So it's all good.
Very good stuff, my friend. All right, well, anyone who stuck with us up until here, you're a hero, and thank you very much.
Yeah, it was fun. We're gonna do it again in the future, and I'll keep following your vlog, and we'll keep in touch.
Same. Talk to you soon.
Take care everyone.